Man, the International Monetary Fund should just shut its mouth here. They're oppressing people here, countries that want to build on Bitcoin. Just systematically, here's the next blow. IMF blocks Pakistan's Bitcoin mining plans, and Daniel Batten says, this is one of the biggest obstacles to Bitcoin adoption. The IMF should just shut its mouth. We've seen how El Salvador was blackmailed, how Argentina was blackmailed, how the Central African Republic was blackmailed, and now Pakistan is next in line to be blackmailed. Pakistan had big plans, huge Bitcoin mining facilities. Michael Saylor even came over specifically to help take Pakistan's Bitcoin plans to the next level and to advise them. And now the IMF just says, hey, no, guys, you're not allowed to do Bitcoin here because it's all unsustainable. It's all really stupid and blah, blah, blah. And now you have to scrap your Bitcoin mining plans. And what's happening here is systematic debt slavery. Alex Gladstein already described this in his book Check Your Financial Privilege, or The Trojan Horse of Freedom, that the International Monetary Fund is basically a loan shark, an institution whose purpose is to oppress third world countries, emerging markets, and developing nations that are on the rise. They hand out loans and say, hey guys, it's all good. We're the benefactors here. We're helping you build up your country. People become dependent on the International Monetary Fund because, of course, they need money. These are third world countries, people facing tough, economic conditions. And then the IMF comes in and says, hey, yeah, you can get the money, but only if you meet conditions A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And only if these conditions are met do you get the money. And then these countries are ruthlessly blackmailed. These are really tough binding contracts. And it's not about making these countries sovereign, but rather about creating not wage slaves, but debt slaves. That's why we're smashing the like button down below now. If you want Bitcoin to prevail here, for freedom, so that institutions like these can't just mess with Bitcoin anymore and use it as a plaything. Because one thing is also clear. The IMF really doesn't like it when Bitcoin simply prevails here. When Bitcoin somehow plays a relevant role in the international financial game. Of course, they would much rather maintain their power, their privileged position here. And now we're going to take a close look at exactly what happened here and why the International Monetary Fund and everyone else who keeps taking shots at Bitcoin should just keep their mouths shut for once. But on your side, it's really not a problem at all. Because every time Bitcoin gets attacked, there's even more of an outcry. Then, of course, there are people making videos, like I am right now, people who talk about it, who write articles about it, people who do follow-up research and really ask, okay, is what's happening with Bitcoin here really that bad? And above all, the crazy thing is, there are actually projects here that could help Pakistan, that could help other countries, that could really make a difference for the people. And then the International Monetary Fund comes along and just throws a wrench in the works. So let's take a look at this now. The blog Trainer also wrote a really good article about this. For several months now, the Pakistani government and the International Monetary Fund have been negotiating plans to restructure the energy sector and to promote industrial consumption of surplus electricity. That means you have a resource, or how do you say, a resource that you don't actually need, surplus electricity that would maybe be sold abroad at negative prices, or that just goes to waste, or where there's simply no buyer. And now you can't use this resource for Bitcoin mining anymore, because Bitcoin is supposedly really stupid and really bad. And now please explain to me down in the comments how Pakistan is supposed to benefit if you don't monetize surplus energy here. If you monetize surplus energy here, then Pakistan would easily benefit from it. That's not even a question. And the thing is, what Pakistan is planning with Bitcoin here is actually a pretty big deal. I mean, they went public with it. They were here in Las Vegas at the conference, and a crypto chief from Pakistan gave a very impressive speech. So that means Pakistan has now announced a clear strategic realignment in the area of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. The country is planning to develop itself into a hub for cryptocurrencies in South Asia, following the establishment of various authorities like the Pakistan Crypto Council and the Pakistan Digital Asset Authority, as well as appointing the former Binance CEO TC as an advisor here. And even Michael Saylor has already advised them. That means they really have some very big plans here. And there have already been several leaks, which I've reported on before, that probably all countries involved with the IMF have received a letter stating that Bitcoin is not allowed. And there's definitely a lot more going on behind the scenes that isn't really made public. I once did an interview with Lena Sage about El Salvador, about some of the things going on behind the scenes there, and so on. None of that should be underestimated, because they really use some pretty nasty tactics here to destroy people or countries in the media. Not literally destroy them, but at least massively attack them. And as I already mentioned, Daniel Batten says this is the biggest obstacle, the biggest break on Bitcoin adoption here. I don't know if I would go quite that far, but it's definitely a major setback, because without the International Monetary Fund, Bitcoin adoption would probably be much further along already. There would probably already be 5 or 10 new countries that, like El Salvador, would have officially introduced Bitcoin, and so on. Now they had to abolish it again because of the International Monetary Fund. And The thing is, for countries, for example, like El Salvador, have a really terrible history, like civil wars, really awful conditions. And people from such countries just don't have any creditworthiness anymore. If they just go to the bank and say, hey, give me a loan, they have a really hard time. And that's why it's often the case. This is the nasty thing about our monetary system, that the people who already have a lot, who have amazing creditworthiness, they can go into debt endlessly, at almost zero cost. Just look at Michael Saylor, for example. Okay, he basically uses that to attack the fiat system. But other people, those at the very bottom of the food chain, they really struggle in this fiat money system, and that's what's so nasty about it. That's also the Cantillon effect, that people on one side are very close to the source of money creation, have very easy access to the capital market, while others don't have that access. And that leads to massive market distortions, where we see an ongoing shift from those who have nothing to those who already have a lot, and the International Monetary Fund actually supports all of this. It says here, the International Monetary Fund sees risks for the electricity market. In a session of the Standing Senate Committee on Energy, Energy Minister Dr. Blah, 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 stated that the International Monetary Fund rejects targeted support for energy-intensive sectors through discounted electricity rates. This is equivalent to tax breaks, which in the past have already led to imbalances in other industries. According to the International Monetary Fund, such subsidies could further destabilize the already struggling and heavily indebted energy sector and cause market distortions. First, fundamental prerequisites such as a stable energy supply must be established in order to actually benefit from the advantages of energy-intensive industries. But what isn't mentioned here is that Bitcoin can actually help stabilize the energy sector, because Bitcoin is also able to balance out the grid voltage or the networks. So, the grid voltage always has to be at 50 Hz. I don't know how it is in Pakistan, what the Hertz number is there. Let me know in the comments below. I'm not a pro, after all. What kind of grid voltage does Pakistan have? The one that always has to be maintained. Is it also 50 Hz? I'm not sure about that. And here, the blog post also very accurately states, these accusations from the International Monetary Fund are absolutely unfounded, because Bitcoin mining facilities are mobile, very important, and modular, and can be set up almost anywhere. That's the crazy thing. You can just take a Bitcoin miner, like you often see when there's some kind of Bitcoin mining ban or something. Then you just send it to the next country and plug it back in. If you happen to have too much electricity, you hit start, and if you have too little, you hit stop again. There are also systems like that in Texas, the ERCO system. Yes, I think it's called the ERCO system, where Bitcoin miners are integrated into grid stability or the power grid. That means when there's excess electricity, they switch on immediately, and when there's too little electricity, they switch off. The Bitcoin miners are basically paid for not consuming the electricity, so that households simply have more available again. And that's a really crazy topic, because how much money is blown every year on grid problems? How much money is spent every year just to keep the grid stable? So, you actually have a double advantage here. You can save on electricity costs. Well, not electricity costs, but how should I put it? You can save on maintenance costs to keep the grids running, to keep the grids stable. On the other hand, you can save costs for negative energy. That is, when you have too much energy and basically, to prevent a blackout. And you can monetize surpluses. So you actually get a triple effect. And fourth, on top of that, you're also supporting the Bitcoin network in some way. Earlier I read that some solo miner has found a Bitcoin block again. That's also really fascinating. And it's always the case that anything that makes people more independent, that makes people self-sovereign, is often attacked by power elites, because the principle is often, okay, our product is crap, our fiat money system sucks, we're running a massive Ponzi scheme here, but instead of making our own product better, we just tried to stop other people from becoming self-sovereign, from stepping into their own power. That's also partly the case in Germany. Instead of saying, okay, let's make the product better, the product Germany, so that it becomes interesting for entrepreneurs, so that, let's say, a lot of very wealthy people, a lot of people with know-how, people who really have what it takes, so that these people come to the country. Instead of saying, hey, let's make the product so good that people want to come here voluntarily, they take a different approach and basically just keep making the product worse and worse. On the other hand, though, they build a wall and basically prevent people from leaving, or something similar. That's also the case here with the international monetary funds. Instead of supporting things like Bitcoin and other innovations that have already been created for human freedom, they basically just try to prevent people who want to move towards freedom from actually doing so, and try to force them back into this straitjacket. And you can also see that some countries end up giving in. With El Salvador, some people say they've given in. I wouldn't say they've given in 100%. Sure, they've made some concessions, but they're still buying Bitcoin and so on. And that's just a huge obstacle. Because look, for example, if you can buy Bitcoin really easily at 21 Bitcoin, it's become so simple now. I always say, just get yourself an app, go to 21 Bitcoin, enter the code Bitcoin Hotel, and you can save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin. If I share that with someone, they can really buy Bitcoin here within 10 or 20 minutes. Okay, of course you still have to send the money over. That does require a bank transfer again, which also takes a bit of time. But basically, within 10 minutes, they're on board here, maybe even faster, and ready to buy Bitcoin. And that's a process where even someone who's new to the space can get involved. Someone who, let's say, doesn't want to deal with all the consequences right away. Just think about how difficult it used to be to buy Bitcoin back in the day. And it's the same with a country. If a country comes along now and onboarding is super easy, the processes are already in place and it's simple. There's no resistance, then of course a lot of people will do it. But if there's a lot of resistance, if it's difficult, if it's complicated and so on, then far fewer people will do it. And that's why Daniel Batten says this might actually be the biggest driver of adoption currently in the Bitcoin network. And I wouldn't fully agree with that, but I do see that Daniel Batten has a valid point here. So you could argue about it, philosophically, whether it's the biggest adoption hammer or whatever. In the long run, Bitcoin wins anyway. I've already told you, you can buy Bitcoin at 21 Bitcoin. There's a link below. Use the code Bitcoin or TEAL. It's a top recommendation. And I'll see you around. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it. Peace out.